Warning! This video contains discussion on content not suitable for a younger audience. Viewer discretion is advised. But hey, I'm not expecting anyone to follow this warning. That would be a beginner's mistake, really.
So, Goblin Slayer. Yeah, I wasn't really thinking about doing a video on this series because I always find that there is a very good chance that any opinion I might have on a controversial topic has been said a million times before. Now, I've watched it, and I have some thoughts, because I'm annoyed that the series isn't really what people say it is. If I'm lucky, these thoughts of mine haven't been posted by anyone else yet, but with the amount of hot takes on this show, that's unlikely. And hey, since I originally wrote these thoughts of mine to paper a couple of weeks back, Crunchyroll has since announced that Goblin Slayer is one of the most watched anime in every US state and most provinces in Canada. Something which only really has happened with things like My Hero Academia, which probably means that there are a lot of people that really like Goblin Slayer. This is going to be so fun! I'm just gonna go and prep my coffin because, you know, I'm gonna be a corpse after this.
This video is brought to you by viewers like you. Thank you. Goblin Slayer is a fantasy action series from Studio White Fox, based on the manga of the same name by Kumo Kagyu. On the surface and from the original promotional descriptions of the series, it seems to follow an extremely dedicated adventurer who calls himself the Goblin Slayer. He, true to his name, slays goblins, and only goblins. He has a young girl in a priestess outfit, referred to only as the priestess, that follows him around, and assumedly, they kill many, many goblins. It is largely what it says on the tin, folks. Of course, the series has shown to be quite a bit more than just that. This is a series that has particular content in it. Content that, for example, has caused Crunchyroll while streaming the series to pop up with a viewer discretion warning. One which I will admit is the first that I have seen on their site. But more on that in a moment. In episode 1, a group of newbie adventurers, the priestess included, decides that for their first foray into the world of adventuring, they should hunt down a group of goblins that have been bothering nearby farmers. The adventurers believe themselves to be perfectly capable of defeating what they describe as the weakest monsters around. This is of course compounded for the viewer by the general fantasy knowledge that goblins, kobolds, and the like are stereotypical fantasy cannon fodder. Unfortunately for our adventurers, they get a little too cocky and wind up being overwhelmed by the goblins and killed. One of them, in a scene that has caused much of the aforementioned controversy, gets sexually assaulted off-screen. This seems to be the tone that Goblin Slayer wants to set. This is what it wants to show you. This is what you should come to expect. Or is it? Now, onto the controversy, since it's a major sticking point for a lot of people. My opinion is thus. I do not believe that any kind of content should be avoided or banned from use in a story. The world, our world, is a dark place, and pretending that these dark things cannot happen in narratives like this, to me, seems somewhat counterintuitive. Warn people about the content, make sure they understand and are not blindsided by it. If it's something they might find disturbing, sure, but it shouldn't be barred from having that content just because of what the content entails. That being said, in the case of Goblin Slayer, I do not believe that this sort of content should have been used in the manner that it was.
Let me explain.
I have seen many comparisons to Berserk come up in discussion about Goblin Slayer's content.
It's a dark fantasy,
They say.
That's just the way it is.
But here's the thing. All content, including this here controversial material, is but a narrative tool. And all tools have their uses. In Berserk, the use of mutilation and sexual assault was used as a means to set the tone, or rather to show a drastic and sudden shift in tone. Early chapters of Berserk were very much a part of the medieval fantasy genre. There were swords and kingdoms and courting of ladies with status, that sort of thing. The monsters and dark magic didn't appear until later, at a point which Berserk fans know all too well. In this case, the content was used as a tool to shift the tone and narrative of Berserk from a tame medieval fantasy to a much grittier and, dare I say, edgier dark fantasy. That was its job, and it did it quite well, mentally scarring all those who had become attached to the characters involved. In Goblin Slayer, though, this kind of content was not used to change the tone of the show. It's only episode 1, there is no tone to change. So maybe you might think it's there to set the tone? No, it's not doing that either. Because if you remove that one section of the story, remove the cave scenes from the narrative, hell, remove the first episode entirely, and Goblin Slayer has the same tone to it that most other fantasy anime have had in recent years. I could fully envision the cast of Konosuba goofing off in a corner of this same Adventurers Guild here in this series. That shouldn't happen in a dark fantasy story. That's what I think is Goblin Slayer's problem. It's trying to have the best of both worlds and failing. It wants to have the same audience as popular isekai shows of the present, but also decides it needs to set itself apart somehow. So it shows you rape and murder, trying to showcase how dark and gritty it is, but next episode comes up and BAM! A big-tittied farmer girl for all your fan service needs. I'd respect Goblin Slayer a lot more if it kept to its darker tone, as gruesome and horrible as it may be, but at present it seems like it just wanted a shocking beginning to pull in an audience before falling in line behind every other isekai show on the block. Goblin Slayer's use of content is not a masterstroke like that of Berserk, it's more of a taser to the narrative. It's a shock to the system that accomplishes a particular tone for but a few moments, and that's it. It's a tone that could have also been accomplished in other ways that do not leave scars on the wound, but chose not to for one reason or another. Now, we are, at the time of this video, halfway into the season, and it might be able to wield this dark tone with more finesse in later episodes, but at the moment, I think it's less apt to say that Goblin Slayer is the next Berserk, when, in reality, I think that Goblin Slayer is instead the next Elfin Lead. Elfin Lead, for those not in the know, is an anime from way back in 2004, and in most circles, it is most well known for one particular aspect. That being its first 15 minutes. In the first episode of Lead, a naked, supernatural murderer tunnels her way through bodies of guards to escape a heavily guarded laboratory. Everyone gets murdered, including a cute girl who gets her head ripped off, and in the end, the murderer named Lucy gets shot in the head and falls into the sea. It's the kind of spectacle which had rarely been seen by many anime fans of the time. But, and I know fans of the show will contest this, the rest of the series never lives up to those 15 minutes. The tone changes drastically as that killer becomes a mostly mute moe blob of a girl. Gone are the massacres, and in comes a love triangle with a boy too dumb to really realize what he's dealing with. It's a shift in tone that drastically changed from the expectations set up in the show's intro, and that, to me, was its biggest problem. Though the series does try to recover by the latter end of its narrative, it was never really able to recapture that shock in the same way. So if I was to go up to anyone who had seen Elfin Lead and mention it casually in conversation, those first 15 minutes will most likely be what they remember, not the love triangle or the clumsy mishaps of the moe blob. They will remember that intro scene above all else. If you want to understand Elfin Lead, you just need to watch episode 1. This is no Higurashi, where you need to experience 2 seasons of content. Just 1 episode of Lead, and you can hold your own in 90% of the conversations that involve it. With Goblin Slayer, I fear that it might fall to the same fate. That it'll be a show remembered for its shocking first episode, but not much else.
Thank you for joining me for this quick discussion. There will be streaming links in the description, as well as a link and coupon code so you can get 600 yen off your first order from our friends at Bookwalker, who just happen to have the Goblin Slayer manga available if that is something you might be interested in. Let me know down in the comments what you have been following this season, and hopefully we'll talk about it in a future video. Unlikely, considering whatever else I'm doing videos on for the next month, but you know, hey, it's nice to say. Lastly, a very special thank you to my patrons, who not only support my work in general, but allow me to do the videos where I can easily talk about the shows in a way that I am passionate about. instead of sticking with the bigger blockbusters is normally what I say, except this is one of those bigger blockbusters, isn't it? Regardless, I love and appreciate you all. Specifically, though, as I like to do, I want to give particular shoutouts to patrons Calhoun Boy, Siri Yamako, Victor Ekmark, Ryfin, Bonaparte, Rune Jacobson, Joshua Garcia, and Devin North for being especially awesome. You guys are great. I love you. And until next time, ladies, gentlemen, and others, watch more anime. And stay frosty.